Thank you, Ralph. And, I'd like to thank all the speakers that went before me because I really think they were great warm-up acts. So I served on probably a dozen corporate boards, and some of them asked me to chair the compensation committee. Now, that is not much of an honor. In corporate America, it's well known that the second dumbest director chairs audit because they want to save the dumbest to chair compensation. I quickly learned, these were not Fortune 500 companies, but they use the same compensation system, the same CEO pay system, and the same consultants that the Fortune 500 or S&P 500 did. Incidentally, from now on, when I mention CEO, I will be talking about CEOs of the S&P 500. So it will be only them. And those CEOs make a lot of money, depending on how you define it, somewhere between, $18 and $26 million a year they averaged. But, athletes and movie stars also make a lot of money. So why am I picking on CEOs? Well, athletes and movie stars make their money in a supply-demand auction market. Sports teams, movie studios bid for their services. And they do this because their skills are portable. LeBron James is going to improve any NBA team he goes to. Meryl Streep is going to improve any movie she's in. That's not the case with CEOs. Most CEOs would not improve another company because their competence rests largely on a very detailed knowledge of a single company. Its personnel, its culture, its finances, its distribution system, its supply chain, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This knowledge is absolutely critical for managing that one company, but it's of almost no use outside that company. Corporate directors understand this, and that's why 75% of all CEOs are internal promotions. Companies don't bid for other companies' CEOs. Less than 2% of all CEOs were previously a CEO of another publicly traded corporation. CEOs jumping from one company to another happen in the S&P 500 happens about once a year. When they jump, they usually fail. They usually fail because they don't understand the new company they're going to. Outside CEO hires are twice as likely as inside hires to be fired. So a company doesn't have, when it's thinking how will it set CEO pay, it doesn't really have a market. There is no market. In place of a market, what they have done is they have adopted a system developed by compensation consultants that turns out to be a very, very rigged system that is guaranteed to escalate CEO pay. Some of the look at the independent parts, and some have a little surface logic to them. When you put them all together, you'll see that it is simply a guarantee for runaway CEO pay. So the first step in this kind of Rube Goldberg machine that the consultants designed is something called a peer group. And that's the idea that the pay of your CEO should be based on what other CEOs of comparable companies make. So the first step in this process is the company has to decide on what its peer group is. Now, I know you will be shocked to learn that virtually every company stacks its peer groups with companies that had very, very high-paid CEOs. So this is the first step. your pay is going to be set by the highest paid CEOs that they could find. Second step is the company has to decide where in this peer group the company belongs, and you as CEO belongs, because the idea here is that, well, superior companies should pay a little more. High-performing companies should pay a little more. Well, every company believes it's a superior and high-performing company. So all CEOs live in Lake Wobegon. Every CEO, on average, every CEO is targeted at the 75th percentile. So let's say you start out with these high-paid CEOs in your peer group. $20 million is the average pay. Then then the company targets you at the 75th percentile. You're now up at $30 million. But the underlying key is pay for performance. You're going to have, so how is that implemented? You are given a whole bunch of largely financial metrics for bonus metrics. And if you hit those metrics, you could make 2, 3, 4 times your target. I talk about the highest paid people in my book for each year from 2011 2014. One of them had a target of 9 million. He made 102 million. Another had a target of 20 million. He made 145 million. So now here's the beauty of this system. Those humongous numbers go back into the peer groups of all the people that were in his peer group. They, next year, get a raise. Why did they get a raise? They got a raise because one of their peers made $145 million. They get raises. Next year, they go back into his peer group again. He gets a raise because he got a raise before. This is the way the mathematics works. So what you've got is this, what I call CEO leapfrog. And every year, there are rounds and rounds of it. And that is what has caused CEO pay to increase 10,000% since this game was started in the mid-'80s. Now, this game makes starting with the peer group. You can see that it's completely illogical. It makes no sense. Consider the peer group for one of the people I wrote about, who was the CEO of United Health Group, who made over $100 million. He had worked only for United Health Group on an accounting firm. That was it, 2 firms, his entire career. His peer group: American Express, Apple, Bank of America, Cisco, Citigroup, Coca-Cola, Costco, Dow Chemical, General Electric, Goldman Sachs, and I'm only a quarter through the alphabet. Now, he had absolutely no experience that would make any one of these companies ever consider hiring him. So whatever they paid their CEO was completely irrelevant to what this guy should make. Yet, it was this peer group that started off as the basis for his pay, which ended up at $100 million. Now, interestingly enough, the adoption of this whole system and the adoption of peer groups and targeting was not based on any coherent theory or any compelling philosophy or evidence that it was somehow more effective or led to better results. Was never blessed by any academic studies or industry conferences. It quickly became ubiquitous because it made the CEO a whole lot more money, and it gave the boards cover. They could hide behind the consultants and say, we hired independent, unbiased experts, looked at objective data, and that's what we based our number on. So as I say, the CEO, the CEO bonus system the bonuses and the multiples of target that you could hit by hitting those bonuses. The CEO is very, very well placed to negotiate on those bonus targets. It could be a bonus for earnings per share, a bonus for EBITDA, they have all sorts of different financial, you read the proxy and you'll see all sorts of different financial measures in there. Now, the CEO controls the company's whole information system and its financial planning system. He knows a whole lot more than the board does about whether a certain earnings per share or a certain EBITDA is going to be a tough goal or an easy goal. And so that's why in about 80% of the time, in my experience, there are no published data on this, but about 80% of the time, CEOs beat their target, often doubling and tripling it. Okay, now CEO pay is one of the very few costs that the board directly controls. It's about the only really important cost that they set themselves. Now, why don't they control costs and just say, well, if it doesn't look like anybody's out to hire this guy, so we'll give him the same 3% we give everybody else. Nobody's after him. And they don't do it that way because it's simply not in their self-interest to control CEO pay. And that's why the CEO pay level in this country has risen from 26 to 1, that's the average of the CEO's pay to the average worker pay. It's risen from 26 to 1 in 1978 to 312 to 1 today. And that's using the lower CEO numbers, not the real numbers that Professor Lozanic is talking about. It'd be up around 500 if you use those real numbers, but they're very hard to get. Now, that's not the consequence of a modern globalized society. In Japan today, that number is 16 to 1. Denmark is 48 to 1. In the most respected institution in the United States, the US military, it's less than 5 to 1. So you don't need a 300 to 1 ratio to perform well. And as I say, it's not in the board's interest to control CEO pay. First, CEOs have often asked them on the board, he's their friend, he's the captain of the team. They're not paying out of their own pocket. They're just paying with shareholder money. It's not costing them anything else. As a matter of fact, there's kind of an incentive to pay them a lot because, and excuse me for using the male pronoun, but 95% of these people are men, and given what I have to say about them, I hope the woman will forgive me. Board compensation and CEO compensation are recommended by the same consultants, so they're highly correlated. And the average board member is making about $300,000 a year for, attending 8, 12 meetings. It's a pretty nice perk. Also, if you're known that you have been difficult on CEO pay, you're not likely to be asked to be on any other boards. Also, you can never be held liable, no matter how much you pay your CEO, because the business judgment rule protects you. And and also there's safety in numbers. You can say, look, this is what everybody does. This is considered a best practice. And even if you consider it insane how much you're paying your CEO, you can rationalize, it's not my fault. It's all those other boards that were irresponsible and they paid their CEOs too much, and now I'm stuck with it and I've got nothing to do. Now, directors would deny that they're shills for the CEO. They would say, oh no, we have to pay him that much for motivation, and we do pay for performance. Well, CEOs are intrinsically motivated. They're very highly motivated people. You don't get to be a CEO if you're not motivated. The pay system can only channel this motivation. And when you have bonuses, big bonuses, for achieving certain things, it will cause the CEO to concentrate very sharply on what will earn him a bonus. Surprise, surprise. That's what the system's supposed to do. That's why you do it. However, it has its downside, because at the same time they're focusing on what will earn them a bonus and rigging the numbers to make a certain earnings per share target. It makes them quite a bit less curious, less creative, less innovative. They become much less motivated by the pleasure of a job well done. And these are the very things that make people perform at their best. Study after study has shown that financial incentives for anything above simple repetitive tasks actually hinder performance. Now, they also say, well, we pay for performance. This is simply not true. It's been studied time after time, and I think the best studies show that either pay and performance, no matter how you define either, are uncorrelated or somewhat negatively correlated. The more you pay the CEO, the worse for the shareholder. Now, this has a lot of, this has an outsized CEO pay, has a lot of cost to the company beyond the 40 or 70 million they waste on paying the CEO. A big problem is morale. I mean, when a CEO is making more before lunch than you make in a year, it's hard to listen to him say, we're all in this together and there's no I in team, etc. And again, that's been shown by a lot of studies. The bigger part is how it focuses on very, very short-term measures. The average CEO serves only 4.7 years. As Bill Lazonick said, receives 80% of his pay in equity and cashes out very quickly. And I think CEOs, they're going to cash out quickly, and the stock price itself is often now a bonusable measure. So if you get your stock price to, say, 92 by the end of the year, you get an extra bonus. CEOs have a very compelling reason to keep their share price high. So they do just what Bill Lazonick has said. They take half their earnings, buy back their stock, don't reinvest, and as he said, they're eating the seed corn. In fact, since 1980, R&D as a percent of revenue and profits has been cut by about 2/3 in corporate America. However, the worst consequence of excess CEO pay is what it does to income equality in this country. It is one of the prime drivers of the rise in income equality, the very steep rise we've seen since 1980. You can have all sorts of, economists will come up with all sorts of reasons, globalization, unions, shareholder value, et cetera, for the rise of inequality. And they're all probably true, and all and more probably true, but the proximate cause is very simple. A small number of people made a huge amount of money. And those small number of people are in the 0.1%. The 0.1%, their share of the income has quadrupled since 1980. And they have captured, and this is, you're talking about, 150,000 households here. They have captured 40% of all net economic gains. These people are not athletes or movie stars. 70% of them are business executives. So the people that are driving inequality are business executives, many of whom compensation is highly, or certainly most of whom compensation is partially influenced by what CEOs make. And finally, or penultimately, this rise in income inequality has impeded economic growth very severely. I don't have time to make that bit. But the system is corrupt and corrupting. It harms companies, employees, the economy. It basically enriches 0.1% and swindles everybody else. Other than that, it's, got some good things. In closing, I'd like to address quickly the larger political issue. I used to write a humor column in the humor blog in Huffington Post, and in 2011, I proposed a very, very simple solution to really all of our political problems. And that was simply to prohibit straight white males from voting. And I think I was a little bit ahead of my time, but I think that's a cause we can all get behind now.